Today, we're diving into a piece of legislation that's, well, a really big deal. It's called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and it's a massive law designed to completely reshape America's tax code and its social safety net. So, let's break down exactly what it could mean for you. So, from its supporters, the message was clear and ambitious. The White House called it the best chance in a generation to push through some huge reforms. The promise was a stronger economy, more money in your pocket. But, as with any bill this big, behind that promise lies a major conflict. And here it is. This is the number at the heart of the entire debate. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. They're the official scorekeepers, and they projected this bill would add a staggering $3.4 trillion to the national deficit over 10 years. That one number really defines the massive trade-off this law is all about. Okay, so let's start with the most popular part of the bill, the part that got all the headlines, the tax relief. This is the promise side of the equation, aimed right at individuals and families. The first big thing this bill does is all about certainty. You see, the individual income tax cuts from 2017, they were actually set to expire. This bill steps in and makes them permanent. So for most working Americans, that means a pretty big scheduled tax hike just doesn't happen. It locks in the rates we have now.
On top of that, it rolls out 4 brand new deductions. You probably heard the slogans, things like no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. And that's what these are. There's also a new bonus for seniors and even a deduction for the interest on a new car loan. But, and this is a really big but, you have to read the fine print. And here's the catch. Every single one of those new tax breaks, they're temporary. They only exist for the 2025 through 2028 tax years. This creates what's known as a tax cliff. It means these benefits are set to just vanish into thin air unless a future Congress decides to pass another law to save them.
All right, so if you're giving away all this tax relief, you have to ask, how do you pay for it? Well, now we pivot to the other side of the ledger, and the funding comes from some huge structural changes to the country's federal health programs. And the scale of these changes is just, wow. Over the next decade, the bill slashes more than $1 trillion in federal health funding. The biggest hits are to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act marketplaces. To put that in perspective, this is the single largest rollback of federal health care support in American history.
And those cuts aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They have a very real human impact. The CBO projects that as a direct result of this law, somewhere between 10 and 12 million people will lose their health insurance coverage. And you can see right here, the vast majority of those losses, almost 8 million people, come from changes to Medicaid.
So how does that happen? Well, one of the single biggest changes is a new federal work requirement for people on Medicaid. Basically, to keep their health coverage, able-bodied adults from 19 to 64 now have to prove they are working, training, or volunteering for at least 80 hours every single month. Now, as you can imagine, this is hugely debated. Supporters say it's about promoting personal responsibility and the dignity of work, but critics and health policy experts are really concerned. They argue that the real-world effect isn't going to be more people working, but that people who are eligible will lose their health care just because they can't navigate all the new paperwork and bureaucracy. And it's not just Medicaid. The bill also puts up new barriers for folks getting insurance through the ACA marketplaces. You know that popular auto re-enrollment feature that makes life easier? That's gone. The sign-up window is now shorter, and it gets rid of a key protection that limited how much you'd have to repay if your income changed unexpectedly. Groups like the American Hospital Association have warned that all this will just make it a lot harder for people to get covered and stay covered. But the ripple effects of this bill, well, they don't stop with health insurance. It also makes deep cuts to other social programs that millions of Americans really rely on for basic needs. The single biggest cut outside of healthcare is to SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's what helps families afford groceries. This bill cuts at least $120 billion from that program, and the estimates say that's going to affect around 22 million families. Okay, stick with me here, because to understand one of the biggest hidden risks in this bill, we have to talk about a law called PAYGO. It stands for Pay As You Go, and it's basically a budget rule for Congress. The idea is simple. If you pass a law that adds to the deficit, you're supposed to pay for it with automatic, across-the-board spending cuts somewhere else. And this is where that PAYGO rule becomes a huge indirect threat. Because this bill adds $3.4 trillion to the deficit, it's like it trips a wire. It automatically triggers those PAYGO cuts. And that would force an estimated $500 billion in automatic cuts directly from Medicare's budget.
So while the bill doesn't directly touch Medicare, its deficit spending puts the program's funding in real jeopardy unless Congress passes a whole separate law just to stop it.
So when you step back and you put all of these pieces together, what you see is that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act presents a fundamental choice, a really great trade-off between two very different visions for the country's priorities.
Let's just boil it all down. On one side of the scale, you've got the gains. Tax rates are permanently lower for most people, and you get 4 years of some very popular new deductions. But on the other side of the scale, you have the costs. Over $1 trillion cut from health programs, a $3.4 trillion jump in the deficit, and according to the projections, about 12 million people losing their health insurance.
And that really leaves us with the one big question at the heart of this entire debate. It forces us to ask, how should a society balance the very real appeal of immediate tax relief for many people with the long-term funding and stability of the social safety net for its most vulnerable? It's a trade-off that will shape the American landscape for years to come.